Thank you very much indeed, Gary, for handing over the camera and a mic to me today, but also for organizing this really important conference. I mean, as a sociologist of religion, it's absolutely clear that communities are having their own culturally, religiously grounded responses and methodologies to deal with the global pandemic. Some that are unique to communities, but often processes that sort of coincide, that come together and highlight the commonalities across cultures and communities. So without taking too much time now, I want to introduce our first speaker. Ibrahim, I could you please put your camera and your microphone on?
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning, Ibrahim. Let me introduce you. Ibrahim is an associate professor in residence at Northwestern University, Qatar, and he is in the journalism and the strategic communication program. His academic interests include the study of the intersections of religion and media, particularly digital media disruptions and religious authority. So today, Ibrahim is going to talk to us about personal agency and religious authority during the pandemic. He's actually joining us from America, and it's 5:30. So thank you very much for joining us. You will have 20 minutes, and I will try and wave my colored cards because Gary has instructed me we've got to keep to time. So when we've got 5 minutes, I'll flash my green card, 2 minutes, my orange card, and red, I'll ask you to stop. Let's see if that works. Over to you, Ibrahim, and thank you very much indeed for coming today.
Okay, thank you. So I sent my slides to you. Were you able to receive them? Or?
Ooh, okay. Yes, I have. Let me put them up.
Yeah.
No, I haven't received your slides. I've just got an Wait. Something's happening, Ibrahim. I think I have received them.
Okay.
Let's see whether I can put them up for you. Gosh, technology.
Well, for some reason it's not working. I've used Teams before, and I used Zoom and once BlueJeans. So for some reason this morning it's not allowing me.
I have them, and hopefully I can share them if it works for you. Let's hope it works for me now. So let's see. So sharing now. Oh God, it's showing me all presentations except yours. Okay. Give me 1 second.
Okay, no problem.
Yes, is that visible?
Well, I only see your name. Oh, there it is. I see it.
Brilliant.
I see it as well.
So excellent. If you tell me when you want your screen shared, Ibrahim, I'll do that for you.
Yeah, just share it, and I'll just say new slide or something like that.
Yeah, whatever. Just wave your hand.
Yeah. But I just want to make sure that people know I know how to handle technology. It's just not working today for some reason.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I want to say good morning to everyone and to thank Gary Bunn for putting this together. This is not a casual issue. It is one that it's affecting so much of our personal lives and religious lives. And to try to put this together with a once in a century moment like a pandemic, I think is very interesting and very important. And so what came to my interest is personal agency, or taklif in Arabic, religious authority during the pandemic, and certain things that I've seen. Next slide, please. All right, so I think it's best to begin with the great merger. We all know how disruptive the COVID pandemic has been to us professionally and personally. I don't think anyone needs to be convinced. It changed the way we taught, the way we learned. It's changed the way we've conducted business and how we shop. So many different things have been affected by the COVID pandemic, and it is nothing less than a major disruptive moment in our lives. However, it merged with what has been happening over the decades, and that is the disruptions of digital media, in this case on religious authority. So you have what is perhaps a perfect storm of dual disruptions happening at the same time. And so last year, I noticed that personal agency, taklif, started coming to the surface simply by observation, just by looking and seeing the decisions that people have made outside the construct of a mosque, since many of the mosques were closed and so forth. And what that did is sort of highlighted, it expanded the discretionary authority that individual Muslims have in their daily lives. And so I also want to just mention that the COVID pandemic probably, or if not likely, if not certainly, is the most mediated illness in human history. And I think that this is something that I think we should pay attention to, because it wasn't simply a disease, a pandemic, it was a COVID firmament. Everything started coming out, conspiracy theories, and all these other sort of cultural divides started appearing, not just in the United States, probably in many places around the world. So this is not simply about a virus, it's really about the reaction to it that's very good to look at. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that captured my attention immediately was the language used to encourage, masking, social distancing, avoiding crowds, etc., seemed to rely on common nomenclature that have been translated into various languages, including Arabic. And it seemed that this has become a centralized cue for people of various language and historical trajectories using similar language, translated language, that has been taken from the World Health Organization or the American CDC, or even Dr. Fauci, who's become a sort of international globalized figure, a globalized authority. He's no longer a person, he's a metaphor of authority about COVID, a metaphor of a person who's resisted the power structures in the United States with regard to getting the word out about the virus. Next, please. And so we're all familiar with this. I'm sure we all do this. We have observations, and often they're initially anecdotal, and they eventually evolve or turn into research questions, and they have research implications. So what I'm going to do today is talk about 3 case studies that are in progress that I want to put together as an analysis of digital text during the crisis that has implications on personal agency, and you'll see what more precisely what I'm talking about. And so anecdotal observations of observant Muslims making their own risk assessments. This is really, I found to be very interesting in personal decisions about mosque attendance. And so my case studies involve 3 separate spaces. They are different from one another. One is in Doha, Qatar, the other is in Chicago, and the other is an online institution. And each one of them is a specific case, and I'll highlight them. Next slide, please. And so here are 3 spaces. I didn't need a separate slide, but just in case, you have Doha, you have Chicago, and the online realm. And you have Islamic institutions that exist almost entirely online. There are no brick and mortars. There's no really door to open. You have to really go to your website. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Yes, 1 second. It did something. Okay, sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. So here are the things that I noticed when I was in Doha, when I was in Qatar. Before the government announced the lockdown of the mosque and Friday prayers were canceled, and during Ramadan, the special Taraweeh or late night prayers were basically saying, don't come to the mosque, you shouldn't come to the mosque. But before that happened, many people took it upon themselves to stay away anyway. This was before there was an implication when the religious authority of a country tells you don't go to Friday prayer, that has sort of a sharia, it has the weight of sacred law. That means you're off the hook for this obliged Friday prayer. But many people beforehand said, we're not going, we know what's going on with the COVID. And so they took it upon themselves. It wasn't related to the authority of the country. So they made their own risk assessments and decided to opt out of what is obliged for men and recommended for women, that's the Friday prayer and also the Taraweeh prayers of Ramadan. And so in Muslim majority countries, let me context. Somebody's rubbing their microphone. All right.
Yeah, we lost you briefly, but you're back again.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. The slides went away, but you know, the slides are not that necessary. I can still speak from my own slides here. Can you get them back up? Is that possible?
Yeah, I'll get them back in a minute. I don't know
no
why
problem.
they've gone.
Oh, no problem.
Teams is having fun with us today. There you go.
All right. So these behavioral examples that I saw, they're hardly casual. I think that if a person is taking it upon him or herself to make these decisions, they're definitely applying personal, you know, ijtihad about whether to go to something that's obliged. Next slide, please. So glocalization, I'm sure we've all heard this before, but whenever we read it on a page, but whenever it really pops up in terms of practice in real life, it's something to pay attention to. So we have this globalized mediation of a disease, but yet there are different local reactions in mosques according to where they're at. So after the mosques were reopened in Doha, with distancing rules, you had to stay 6 feet apart from your fellow worshiper, many observant Muslims still stayed away. And this was true in Doha, and this was true in Chicago. So what does this potentially mean is that individuals were making personal risk assessments in these times that have the weight of sacred law, meaning an individual who evaluates his or her risks and the potential risk to the family of getting sick and spreading that sickness to their family, that had the weight of sacred law. In other words, people became their own muftis with their assessment with the risk assessment and how that impinges upon ritual performance. And I just found that to be really fascinating. I know that this was not uncommon. Many people, in fact, to this day, have not gone back to the mosque since a year and a half or a year and a few months ago. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so the questions now. So here are the research questions that this came to in my mind and preliminary studies of institutional responses. How did institutions respond? It's not necessarily about the pandemic per se that has caused these effects. Rather, it's about the responses themselves and how that affected al-mukallaf, which means the loci of responsibility. So the whole notion of taklif here is the impact of personal responsibility based on not a mosque leader, not an imam, not the awqaf, the ministries of religious authority. It really was on the individual who, upon him or herself, made these choices. New slide, please. So here are the 3 case studies that I'm looking at. And one is in the Arab Gulf and Doha. And I'm looking at the social media texts and messaging of the Ministry of Islamic Affairs there. And they were actually very robust and you know, I'm sorry for this word, but they were actually quite hip in this sort of Wahhabi-light country. And they were really on it. Their messaging was very open-minded and was very interesting. So what I did is I started to save those little clips that I saw on Twitter and Facebook and on their own websites. And so I thought that this would be a very good thing to look at in terms of their messaging. And then in Chicago, there's a major mosque here in which, yes, there's a major mosque in Chicago on the south side that I'm familiar with. And so that I noticed that they had an increase of digital products during the pandemic, and they would literally have sermons, but without the expectations that the Friday sermons you hear are validate your Friday service at home. No, you still have to make up for the Friday prayers, and you pray the regular, what they call dhuhr prayers, noon prayers, but still they had digital sermons, khutub, and so this was there. And then you have lectures and so many other different kinds of content. And I'll tell you why I feel this is very important, because in the U.S., in Chicago, and many Muslim minority countries, community is the lifeline of the mosque. It is what funds it, what keeps it going, and the community is required to be engaged. If the mosque is going to survive, they're going to pay their bills. So engagement with the community was very important. Next slide, please. And then I'm looking at the Yaqeen Institute. This is a growing institute founded in 2016 by Dr. Ahmad Suleiman. And they are, in their messaging during the COVID was really robust. And I've started to investigate or read their printed or so-called print versus their video to see what messaging they had that impinged upon personal authority. Next slide, please. So the research design is obviously here. It's a case study and approach, and my methodology is qualitative textual analysis. As I'm looking at the text that people have used, the imams, the leaders of a country, what they have said, the messaging that they have sent out that was propulsive, it wasn't casual, and there are many markers of authority and agency that were embedded in what they had said. So this is something that I'm currently looking at, and hopefully will result in some kind of paper. I hope something is publishable, God willing. So, and so basically, the main things I'm looking at is relief from mosque obligations. If you see the relief from mosque obligations, clearly it goes back to the individual to make these choices after the lockdown. In fact, as I mentioned before. So let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind. And so this is their Twitter account. I follow them, have been following them, and they have been regular with the content about COVID, and they would put these little clips. And let me give you an example of one clip where a person of the ministry, obviously a sheikh or imam, was basically saying, if you stay away from a mosque, you're being more pious than trying to go to it. Basically, putting the blessings of going to a mosque really sort of behind staying away, because staying away is you're offering protection, and this became more important than actually attending. And so this was their messaging, and basically shifting the burden of responsibility and of choice from the ministry to the individuals to choose. Next slide, please. Mosque Foundation in Chicago. Again, this is a big one. I think I can't see if you're holding up cards, but let me just say this: the Mosque Foundation in Chicago is one of the largest mosques in the Chicago area. As a matter of fact, this community is so big. It's one Friday prayers has more than 1,000 people, and because of the community has grown, they couldn't fit all the people, so they had to have 2 Friday prayer sessions, each with 1,000+ people to accommodate the size of the community. This is the normal situation. During the pandemic, they shut down because the city of Chicago declared a shutdown, and Illinois did. In the U.S., I think you know this already. The federal government cannot shut down things. It's at the state level, and so the state put a quash on this. And as far as I know, most of the mosques, they obliged and shut down. However, what we saw, though, was sort of a risk on the mosque itself. If you go to the third point there, and the difference between state-funded and state-guided houses of worship, as in Qatar, and then community-based, community-funded, and community-established, you saw differences in digital content because it affected not just the authority, but really the funding pressures of a mosque. Because people go to the mosque, they put money into the boxes and so forth. Next slide, please. I'm almost finished, but I just want to give you a chance to see some of the differences I'm looking at. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research, since its founding in 2016, they have produced more than 1,100 videos, papers, and multimedia infographics. It was founded in 2016. Dr. Ahmad Suleiman is a very charismatic speaker. He's very well known. He's become one of the well-known Muslim scholars, up there with Hamza Yusuf and Zaid Shakir. He's really well known, and he himself is one of the primary producers of content, but they have dozens, and I was surprised at this, dozens of scholars and preachers and academics part of the Yaqeen Institute. For example, Jonathan Brown of Georgetown University often has papers and presentations on there. But during the pandemic, at least 50 COVID-related presentations were made. And I think this is actually much larger than that number, because when I did a search, it can only look for the word pandemic and COVID in text, like articles. So in the videos themselves, they're not searchable, but I'm going to go through them. But so I think that we're going to come up with a larger number of actually COVID-related presentations. Next slide, please.
And you have about 3.5 minutes.
Thank you. I will try to do it in 3 and give my half to.
I'm sorry for the technology.
No, I'm sorry. If you go back to the previous slide, just.
There you go.
Okay, so basically what I want to do is content analysis on, ideological content analysis on the text, but also what I want to, and I hope to do, and I think that this shouldn't be difficult, and that is to get an interview with the founder and the top 2 or 3 content scholars who represent different fields, academics and universities in America, preachers, and so forth, and ask and really try to probe the intentionality behind some of the content that they produce and how that may impinge upon something like taklif, a personal authority and personal agency. And I want to also, quite frankly, in the very end, I said, and access. What I would like to do is use a survey methodology, but they would have to give me access to their mailing list and email list, and hopefully I think that would go pretty smoothly. So if you go to the next slide, and so I can conclude this, we're dealing with different physical spaces, U.S. mosques versus a mosque in the middle in the Arab Gulf, and then a institute that is without physical space. And interestingly, I just see there's a difference in the kind of content that's produced in each one of the different spaces for non-religious reasons, but because of the arrangement of the religious obligations and the religious offerings that these places have. Next slide, and that I think is my concluding slide. Okay, I said that. Next slide. Okay, very good. So again, just to summarize, we have a perfect storm for authority and agency. We have a pandemic, we have digital media and the glocalization. And the notion of religious authority has been expanded in the digital age. It's well beyond the so-called nodes of authority. We saw that authority is really a huge ambit that's been expanded, or at least has been noticed more so in the digital age. And with the pandemic, the authority ambit saw an emergence of greater personal agency. And in my future studies, this is what I would like to demonstrate, because we are all responding to the pandemic in our own ways, and also, and as a result, communities are responding as well, whether they're brick or mortars, or you open a door or walk in, or you just open a website and watch. And so it's interesting to see the differences of content that's been spurred on by the differences of spaces. So thank you very much. I'm sorry if I had to rush this through, but I'm honored by being part of this August group. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim, and apologies for the technological issues, and thank you also for being spot on time despite me not being able to show you my colored cards that I was so proud of.
Okay, so
I think ideas of, yeah, go on. I think trying to understand in the community and individual reactions to COVID, through this notion of taklif and having to navigate personal and communal spaces, I think excellent food for thought. We will take questions at the end of the panels, but colleagues, please, if you've got immediate questions for Ibrahim, put them in your chat, in the chat box, and I shall keep an eye on them and make note of them for the last part of the session. Now, thank you again, Ibrahim.